Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone, welcome back to my lecture. So today we'll continue our debate on the tax incidence. In the tax incidence, in our previous discussions, what we did was if tax is imposed on the commodity, so how that gets distributed between consumer and producers, and then how supply curve and demand curve they react. So we also had taken example of perfect competitions, like in perfect competitive markets, if tax is imposed, how consumer behavior through demand curve will be changed and how producers behavior through supply curve is changed. So just to continue our discussion, so I just would like to first begin with the one case like where effects of a commodity tax on the supply and definitely how producers behavior will be. So I would like to take two cases here. One is through farm and the market. So that is very important, like how farm reacts and then how market reacts on the say on the tax when tax is imposed or levied on a commodity, and only producers are adjusting with the, on the tax, and then that tax how that gets distributed between consumer and producers. So let us take the graphical illustrations, and by now we already know that what are the measurement and what are the graphical representation that we are actually taking as like example to show these impacts. So when we are talking about under perfect competitive market, like just assume that farms and market that we are talking about under perfect competitions. So two things that we'll draw in two panel, say here panel 1 and here say panel 2, and in panel 2 let us see that panel 2 talks about the market, how how these interactions happens in the market, especially when we talk about the any commodity, and when we talk about the market, as we know that we are talking about demand and supply function or supply curve in the market. In the first panel we are taking the example of the farm, like what happens on the price and then taxes at the farms level. So under perfect competition, perfect competitive markets, as we know that demand curve is horizontal straight line. As we know, this is like also P equals to AR equals to AC, and this is what nothing is our demand curve. So in the farm, and here say price is measured along with the vertical axis and quantity is measured along with the horizontal axis. Likewise, price is measured on the vertical axis in panel B, panel 2, and then quantity is of the commodity is measured along with the horizontal axis. So this is what we are just trying to understand, what is the impact on the price of the commodity at the market, and what is the impact on the price at the farms level. So assume that farms level's price is fixed at say P1, right? So here when we are talking about supply curve, and then farm supply curve is basically the marginal cost, and assume that the first marginal cost is like MC1 is equals to S1. As we know that in the farm side, marginal cost curve, upward sloping marginal cost curve is basically farm supply curve. So now supply curve initially before the tax, so we have to understand that this is before the tax. So before the tax, say tax is small t, so before the tax supply curve is S1, and then demand curve and supply curve, they are interacting with each other at say at point A, and then say here like say Q1 is the OQ1 amount of quantity is getting demanded under the perfect competitive market at the firm's level. So now suppose tax is imposed on the commodity, and tax is imposed on the producers. So producers certainly will include that tax in the cost of productions, and therefore as a result marginal cost curve will be shifting leftward, which is upward. So this is what the change is, like say supply curve shifts from S1 to S2, which is nothing, which is basically S1 plus T. So this gap, as we already know, this is the tax. So we can see that price is fixed here, and here we can see that quantity has reduced from OQ1 to OQ2, and then we moved from A to B in the equilibrium point. So this is just one point of discussion, like when tax is imposed on the producers, like on the commodity, and then thereby producers is getting affected, and then this is how price will have the upward pressure. But then with the new supply curve, quantity will be reduced from OQ1 to OQ2. So now let us see what happens in the market. So here, along with the same price level, assume like same product that we were talking about. So once that is produced at the farm, then that particular product is coming to the market. So like let us assume like OP1 level of OP1 amount of price, what is happening in the demand function and then supply function. For instance, market demand curve is downward sloping, and with OP1 amount of price, product is getting supplied at that level, and the total amount of quantity that is in the market, that will be like what we consider as optimum level of quantity of the product, like OQ1. So optimum level of Q1, and at the price, say at OP1 amount of the price, equilibrium point that we are getting at the intersection where demand and supply before the tax, like again S1 is the before tax. So here at A, that we are getting the market equilibrium. Now since farm like producers got the tax impositions, so basically tax is levied on the commodity, and then at the farm level, supply curve, especially marginal cost curve, has shifted to the leftward, and here supply curve, market supply curve also will shift, and that is to S2 level, which is like S2 is nothing, S1 plus small t. So this gap is actually T, as we already discussed in our previous lecture as well. So this is a case under in the perfect competitive market, but then here we are trying to show that how farms level at the farms level how taxes is actually included, and then after the farms level, then it gets into the market. So we get the new equilibrium point, and new equilibrium point is point B, and at point B, since price will be high, price has already been increased because of the tax imposition of small t, then obviously consumer demand for that particular commodity will be reduced, and therefore overall demand for the quantity or demand for that particular commodity or commodity demand rate will be reduced from OQ1 to OQ2. Or maybe we can actually make it little more clear here. So let's not talk about capital Q1 and Q2. Instead, at the farms level, we can say like Q1, small q1, and then small q2. And then when it is coming to the market, and we can think of bigger like amount of the quantity, because in the market it is always supply and demand is a horizontal summation. that we already know. So now here at the firms level, total production will also be changed in the market. Also in the market, demand for that particular commodity also will be changed, will be reduced. In fact, like from O capital Q1 to O capital Q2. So here we can see the changes. So consumer is paying more, and here as we see, like the total tax, like say capital T is like point A to C level, and here we get one point like P1, and here say P2, and here P3. So this OP1, like say entire, as we know from the previous discussion as well, but then entire tax is basically the changes of the price, which is the tax amount, which can be divided into two parts. One is P1, P2 plus P1, P3. So this is how tax will be shared or borne, or tax burden will be shared by both the parties, one by the consumer and one by the producers. So producers tax burden is P1, P3, and then consumers tax burden is like P1, P2. One point that I'd like to highlight here, flag off, that one should not be getting confused here. So don't think that producer is getting actually sort of getting losses here, or consumer also paying much more than the willingness to, or maximum reservation price. So here if you can see both the prices, whether we consider S1 or S2, we can see here minimum price or minimum acceptable price for the producers is much lower than P1 and P2. So it is not a loss making for the producers, but certainly it is not the optimum producer surplus that they can actually extract from either from B or C. So maximum level of consumer surplus or producer surplus that they will get it from the market is at point A. So that is, I think, very clear. And then this particular discussion we will also discuss when in context of say deadweight loss in our later part of the discussions as we move on. But then here we are trying to just to show you what would be the impact on the overall price at the farm level, and also what is the impact on the price at the market level when tax is imposed on the commodity and producers is only is supposed to pay the check to the government. So it does not mean that producer come entirely bear the tax burden. So in general case, producers, and that is a very natural way to react from the producer side as a rational economic agent. So this particular tax share or imposition of the tax will be shared by both the parties. One is by the consumer, the other one is by the producers. So let's move to the next point. So elasticity, as we know that elasticity is very important debate, because elasticity shows the relationship between price and quantity. In other words, one can say that what is the changes on the total commodity or demand rate due to 1% change in the price. So I'm just reiterating, if you can recall, that is the the definition of the elasticity, or say price elasticity. And then certainly we also discussed about how price elasticity happens when commodities are elastic, relatively elastic, or what happens when commodities are relatively inelastic. So how demand function changes, how supply function changes, and how supply curve changes. And also we have seen some extreme measures in case of perfectly elastic goods or perfectly inelastic goods. So here we will take this extreme examples like perfectly elastic and perfectly inelastic, and when we impose the tax on the consumer or on the producers. So who will bear and how supply and demand function they actually react. So we'll discuss here. So so the first point that we would like to highlight here, that imposition of tax on a commodity, but then the entire tax burden will be borne by the consumer. So if that is the case. So just to remember, the more elastic, and we already know that the more elastic is a demand curve, the less elastic is a supply curve, and the more tax will be borne by the producers and the vice versa, right? So this is just to kind of recollect what we already discussed. So relative elasticity of supply and demand is basically commodity tax mainly borne by the consumer. So we'll show this with two examples. So one is with perfectly elastic supply, the price rises by the full amount of the tax, and the entire burden of the tax is on the consumer, right? So now let us draw. So just similar example, like say quantity along with the horizontal axis and price on the vertical axis. So let's say this is the demand curve. So first case where we are saying that supply curve is perfectly elastic, which is horizontal straight line, which is like elasticity is infinity, and this is say our first supply curve, which is like A is a equilibrium point, and at that level we get the Q1. And now suppose tax is imposed, and after tax imposition S2, like say new supply curve which is higher, and S1 plus T. So this gap is basically the T. So we get the new equilibrium point, which is B. And total quantity is getting reduced from Q1 to Q2. So price, if you look at, so initially price was P1 and then here P2, and this increase in the price is basically due to the tax. So example we can actually consider, like when supply for a particular commodity is fixed for any market with single or identical product, where price is fixed, and then if price is getting increased, then overall quantity will be reduced because of the rise in the price, and then we can see that there is no close substitute. So in that kind of commodities, when we deal with when supply curve or producer deals with the one single commodity and commodity market, and this could be one of the assumptions that we can think, like supply curve will be perfectly substitute, and then it will be horizontal straight line. So here we can see that P1 is price is getting increased from OP1 to OP2, and with the amount of like changes, this price is nothing, is exactly the equal amount of the tax, and that's how quantity is getting reduced. So this is what we call with a perfectly elastic supply curve, how it looks like, and then entire, like this increase of the price from OP1 to OP2, the additional amount like T or say delta P, the changes of the price like P1 P2 amount will be solely borne by the consumer. If producer is imposing the entire tax on the commodity and therefore price is getting increased, the entire price or the new higher price will be paid by the consumer. So this is one of the cases where market for single product or there is no close substitute is there in the market. So now let's take another one example where we are taking with a perfectly inelastic demand, where the price rises with the full amount of the commodity taxes and entire burden is on the consumer. So we can actually take this Again, we can draw like perfectly inelastic demand. Here, like say demand curve is vertical straight line, and here is like elasticity we can consider as equals to 0, and price is like P along with the horizontal axis, and along with the vertical axis is the quantity demanded. So assume the product that we can think like say life safeguard or life saving drugs or medicine. It really doesn't matter how much the price, even price is increasing, one has to consume that, and therefore quantity is actually fixed at say at Q1 level. Now here for instance S1 is a before tax the supply curve for the producers. Now suppose tax is imposed like say amount of P, and then supply curve shifts from S1 to S2, and S2 is equals to S1 plus T, and here like say P1 is the initial price, and then next price is P2, and then amount of say changes in the price, which is nothing, is basically P1 P2 is nothing, is the tax, and this tax is being solely borne by the consumer. So we have shown like in case of perfectly elastic supply curve, like when supply curve will be horizontal straight line, or if demand curve is perfectly inelastic, in these two extreme cases, tax imposition on the commodity, the entire amount of tax will be borne by the consumer. So this is one set of examples that we are supposed to understand when even frame the taxation policies and try to understand different types of commodities. So when we are talking about perfectly inelastic demand, so policymakers also are very careful when it imposes on the certain essential commodities like say medicines and all. So that's how even defining the taxes, that also varies, because these are the people who are entirely depend on certain life-saving medicines, and therefore the moment tax is imposed and that tax is very high, and then entire tax will be borne by the consumer. So economic wise, economic theoretical wise also we can actually show this, and then that one really needs to be very careful. So now let's continue this particular discussion, and then let's move to the next example, where we are talking about imposition of the tax on a commodity but then borne by the consumer, right? So so relatively, just in sum, what we are supposed to know is relative elasticity of supply and demand. Commodity tax will borne by producers. The first case, with perfectly inelastic supply curve. Like just imagine the price does not rise at all, and the full burden of the tax is on the producers. Like say supply curve is becoming perfectly inelastic, like vertical straight line, and along with the y-axis is price, and along with the x-axis is the quantity demanded is being measured. So now, so this is what the supply curve, and here this is the demand curve. So now here is the price, and here is the Q1, and then here P1. So in this particular case, like for example, take the example of say very antique say product or market for the antique goods, or assume that premium land or housing in the or land in the premium locations, for instance. Then obviously supply for that particular commodity, if it is antique or if it is land in the premium location, will be perfectly inelastic, which is horizontal, which is vertical straight line. So here we can see like there won't be change in the price level, and then entire tax will be borne by the producers. So now, with a perfectly elastic demand, if we look at this as a case study, and with the graphical representations, we can see that perfectly elastic demand, like here say demand is fixed at P1, so it is horizontal straight line, so this is the demand curve. We can imagine perfectly competitive market case, and here the price does not rise at all, and the entire burden of the tax is on the producer. So we can actually imagine this way, like S1 before the tax, and then after the tax, like S2, which is S1 plus T, and then this gap, as we know, is a T. So here quantity is actually getting decreased from Q1 to Q2, and this changes is basically due to T, but then price will be fixed at say P1 because it is perfectly elastic. So P1 will be equals to PT, P1 equals to P2, sorry. P1 will be equals to P2, so there won't be any changes in the price because price is given here. If price is measured is on the vertical axis and Q is measured along with the horizontal axis, so even after the tax imposition on the commodity, so the entire tax, like small t, will be solely borne by the producers and it will not be transferred to the consumer. So it is here, like in case of in the second case and also in the first case, that price is higher price or imposition of the tax is not getting transferred to the consumer and it is solely borne by the producers. Both in both the cases, when supply curve is perfectly inelastic and when demand curve is perfectly elastic in these two cases. So in sum, we can see like case wise, like if you just to wrap it up, like if demand is inelastic like petrol, and then supply is inelastic like land, labor in the short run. So demand elasticity in the first case, when demand is inelastic, like say case number 1, when demand is inelastic, essential commodities like petrol or say I mean here we're talking about inelastic, we are not talking about perfectly inelastic because we already spoke about it. Perfectly inelastic is some of the life-saving medicines one can consider, but then perfectly, I mean demand is inelastic, one can consider as a petrol or say diesel. Like these are essential. Hardly changes in the quantity will be there if 1% changes in the price that occurs. So if demand elasticity is relatively inelastic, the demand elasticity will be low, supply elasticity will be high, and then consumer will bear the most of the burden. So this is just for you to remember, recollect, and this kind of summary of this couple of points of the discussions. When supply is inelastic, like say land, labor in short run, and we are not talking about perfectly inelastic supply curve, where we have given the example of say land in the premium locations where it is completely fixed. So here we are talking about relatively inelastic. So demand elasticity will be high, supply elasticity will be low, and then producers mostly will bear the tax burden. So these are the two references that I have used for this particular lecture, and I stop here and I urge you to go for further details and also to see other examples given in different other contexts and in different other countries' contexts following these two books. So thank you very much for your attention, and I will see you in my next class.